The point is coming. So peer review, the eugenics program, the eugenics movement, the eugenics, it was based on bad science. It lacked means it was missing true peer review, any kind of deep thought, no experimentation, or control groups, or a testable hypothesis, testable question. Right? What they started with was assumptions. They started with assumptions. They started with the assumption that everything was inherited. And they never questioned that statement. It was a statement. They read Darwin's work, they read Mendel's work, they felt they were educated, they felt they were knowledgeable, they were mostly well off, they had money, they were people of primary citizenship, they weren't secondary citizens like African Americans or Hispanics. You understand that. Or Chinese, the Chinese were pretty much in the same boat. In fact, at the time of slavery, the Chinese were having their own issues on the West Coast in California. Hispanics, well, they lost the war. I'm not sure how they were treated back then, but I'm sure it wasn't that great. So you had this kind of second tier citizenship. You were a citizen, but yeah, you had to have real you weren't really listened to. Again, that goes for poor white people as well in the Appalachians. So they had no problem sterilizing these people because they felt everything was inherited, so all these social problems could be solved with this quick and simple solution: decrease the population of poor people, decrease the population of mentally challenged, decrease the population of mentally ill, and you solve our society's ills. We'll create a utopia. Well, that's not how things work, right? Because they really didn't understand genetics, and they really didn't understand what a real experiment was and what it means to think about all the different factors that might influence something. One of the things is they just assumed that everything was based on biology, on DNA, on the inherited part, and there was nothing. And we call that, there's an old saying you might have heard: nature versus nurture. That's right. They kind of sided on the idea that it's nature, it's the inherited that was the most important. They never asked the right question. That's another thing they could lack, asking good questions. So all the things we've been talking about with good science, they did not do. They did bad. They went on bad science. First, they started with a statement that they accepted. They accepted as true. That was a mistake. As we said, in science, we assume that everything is the best we can do until we find evidence that says otherwise. And they just accepted that as true. And then secondly, they never did any of these steps, not in any kind of real way. They might have superficially done it. So this caused a lot of problems. 10, 15 years later, people found out they couldn't have babies. It was because something that happened back then on Native American reservations. Girls didn't want to go in to have babies on the reservation. Even to this day, even in the 70s and 80s, Native American women did not want to go into the clinic, right? Because they were worried that they were going to get sterilized. Fast, a little bit further, or about the same time, or a little bit further. I'm a little vague on the timeline here, but in Tuskegee, Alabama, have you heard of Tuskegee? And I'm probably misspelling it. I apologize. Tuskegee, Alabama, is a city very famous because of two things: the Tuskegee Airmen. African American World War II pilots that were heroes and that fought racism, fought for the right to defend this country, which seems crazy to me. It seems crazy that at a time of war you would say, wow, these healthy, talented people, I'm not even going to consider that because they're African American. Like, that's insane to me. And we need people. We are dying out here. But anyways, Tuskegee, Alabama, that's where the Tuskegee Airmen were from. About the same time World War II, about the same time the Airmen were having that battle with the United States federal government and the United States Army. It was the Army. There was no Air Force at the time. The Air Force was part of the Army. Okay. So in any case, in Tuskegee, Alabama, there was a doctor who was doing what you would think. He did have a good question. He did have a good question, yes. He had a good hypothesis. Yes, he did. Check, check. He had control variables. He controlled the variables. Yes, okay, he did that. He had a control group. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. He did. He had all that. So you would think that's good science, but it turns out this was also bad science, and there were more than one doctor. It was doctors, and it was all with the federal government. We had a problem with contagious diseases. We had a problem with a war. We had a war. The Spanish flu was killing people at the same time in World War I, and then later it rebounded again between World War I and World War II. We had, if you got sick on the battlefield, you were probably going to die. We needed something to fight STDs because people were having sex, but they were getting sick from the sex. Syphilis was a big problem. Gangrene, battlefield infections was a big problem. So the federal government had a lot of investment in trying to find out how to solve these problems because we were in a war. So there was a question. The question was, does penicillin cure syphilis? So penicillin, does penicillin cure syphilis was the question, and I'm not sure if that was the actual question, but something like it. Syphilis is a bacteria, an STD bacteria that ultimately causes you to go insane and die. So not a good thing to get. It gets in your brain and eats your brain, and you just end up in just a miserable situation. So they had a question. They had a hypothesis. Their hypothesis, yes, if the patients get penicillin, then the syphilis infection will be under control. That was the hypothesis. Pretty simple, right? Next, they needed a bunch of people that were the same. They had to control all the variables, so they had similar humans because they were going to do human testing. Because this was all human testing. So they said, okay, well, we have to control. We just get people that are mostly the same, mostly similar. So similar height, similar weight, similar health, illness pre-exposure and they had a control group that they gave a placebo to, and a placebo is like a sugar pill. You don't know you're getting a sugar pill. You think you're getting the medicine, but they want to see it. So these people are not. No medicine, no penicillin, no meds. Then there was another group. This was your control group, by the way. Right, group 1 was your control group. So you're going to compare people that have the disease to people that don't. Secondly, they gave the actual penicillin to. And they compared those two. Then, of course, they had a group 3, another control group, that they gave the meds, but that did not have syphilis. They wanted to make sure that it was safe to give this penicillin to people that did not have syphilis. Well, it's kind of hard to find a bunch of people that had syphilis at the same stage, right? To have the same control group here. This control group was very difficult, right? You had to find a group of the actual experimental group was going to be difficult, and you had to then compare it to the control group. So these two had to be of similar age and similar characteristics, and then not have syphilis, and have syphilis. These have to have syphilis. They both 1 and 2 both have to have syphilis, so that you can compare whether penicillin was doing something to the syphilis or not. Does that make sense? And then they all have to be at the same stage of the disease. They all have to be the same age. So there wasn't a lot of time. And so they decided, well, we're going to take some healthy men and give them all syphilis. Do you see a problem with that? That's a problem. You can give healthy men, and we're going to give them all syphilis, and then give half of them penicillin. The other half, we're not going to do anything. We're going to just watch them die. We're going to watch them get sick and die. Or maybe they'll get better on their own. I don't know. But we're going to see what happens. Well, the logic makes sense, right? We do that to animals, and we don't feel good when we do it to animals, but we do it, right? And that makes sense because, we kind of eat animals anyway, so we don't want to see them suffer. It's not something that we do lightly, but we'll do it with like rats and guinea pigs. But here we're going to use them with humans. These are human men. Now the doctors had to make a choice. They had to find, and you know what? I saw an interview with the doctor in med school. We saw an interview with the doctor that did this, one of the doctors that did this. They asked him, why did you choose the men that you did? They said, they trusted us. He said they were trusting. They trusted us. So they took groups of men. They chose African American men. And at the time, hey, these are doctors. They're from the government. I trust them. Why not? They're my doctor. There's actually a really good movie on this if you want to watch it. I think it's on Netflix, but I forget the name of it. It's about the nurse, one of the nurses, African-American nurse that was in the project. She did her best to manage this mess, right? And so, obviously, so the question is, and why'd they pick African-American men? Because African-American men trusted them. And also, probably a big part of that was that the people wouldn't really, they didn't have power, right? And because they had no power, it wasn't a big deal if they complained, correct? Remember, this is a time of World War II. There was segregation. There was very little African-American voice in the government. Agreed? So it was a lot easier to do something like that with African-American men. I'm sure that was a big part of the decision-making. Now, my question to you is, why is this bad science? It's inhumane. It's unethical. Let's write that down. It's a big part, and it's in your chapter reading. It's unethical. Meaning it's not ethical. Not ethical. And I like the word inhumane. Inhumane. Not what? In this case means not human. Humans should not do this to other humans. It's not right. This is not something anyone should decide to do. I'm going to not tell these guys. I'm giving them a disease. They're coming to me. I'm giving them a disease. And then I'm not going to give them the cure. And I'm going to give these guys the disease. And I'm going to give them the cure. And I'm going to compare the two. I should not do that. That is unethical and inhumane. That was, in my opinion, a crime against society. But, there it is. So, to rewind and think about this in a bigger picture, we had a government conspiracy it's a conspiracy. Do y'all agree? All this is a conspiracy. When someone hides something, works with other people, and doesn't tell you about it in order to get something done that's not good for you, especially if it's not good for you, but even if it's good for you, if they're doing it without your consent and they're working behind your back, it's called a conspiracy. Agreed? Yes or no? Okay. So the government, doctors, nurses, the establishment, in both these scenarios, real scenarios that actually happened, and many of these things happened in the 40s and 50s and 20s, okay? These are just two really prime examples, two big examples. But women being sterilized, and poor people being sterilized, and mentally challenged, mentally ill people being sterilized without their consent, without their knowledge, and again, because they were trying to solve society's problems, they have poor white people, African Americans, Native Americans, all being sterilized, Hispanics being sterilized without their consent. Not a good thing. Do you think people forgot that? Do you think aunties at Thanksgiving didn't mention what happened to them? These are stories, right? These are stories that have been told from family member to family member for generations. Generations. Then you have the Tuskegee experiment. By the way, it all came to light. It was a really big deal. So the Tuskegee experiments. And then, of course, you have the Henrietta Lacks. Have you ever heard of Henrietta Lacks? So Henrietta Lacks is another big issue. But you got all this unethical, inhumane science going on. The first was bad science on many levels. The first example, the idea that you could solve society's problems with breeding out the bad genes, right? That was bad science. The misunderstanding of how the whole system works. Then the second is theoretically, logically it works, but the human part, the ethics behind it, failed miserably. And both of these things together, along with all the other examples like Henrietta Lacks and the rest, what they led to was a real big problem that we saw during COVID is a loss of what? Trust. Loss of trust. People did not trust the government. People did not trust doctors, especially if you were historically from a poor white family, African American family, Hispanic family, Native American family. Your aunties and grandparents, and well, it wouldn't be your grandparents if it was the sterilization project, but maybe your grandfather, great-grandfather was one of the guys that had syphilis, or knew somebody who got in the Tuskegee experiments, that syphilis experiments. But whatever, there was a fundamental loss of trust. People still went to the doctor because they had to. People still used the government because they had to. But there was a fundamental secret that everybody knew was an issue. You can't trust these people. You can't trust them. We've already been burned once. I'm not having my daughter sterilized. I'm not having my son injected with syphilis. Right? That's not happening. So fast forward with vaccinations. All this just to understand what was going on with vaccinations. We had this problem with autism. And people didn't like needles, right? Some people don't like needles. Well, most of us don't like needles. We don't like them. They're scary. We don't trust these people. There's a fundamental loss of trust, so that's an issue too. But most people got vaccinated at one point before the next step in bad science hurt society. There was a doctor, and I don't remember his name, you can look it up, who looked at autism. Do you know what autism is? Does anybody know what autism is? All right. It's a mental disability that doesn't allow people to develop the way the rest of us do. And sometimes it's a spectrum. There's a lot of issues. We're not sure. I don't even know if they know all the ins and outs of autism. It's a spectrum, so there's a lot of different problems that people can be very severe. My nephew, for instance, has autism. He's very severe. And you can have people that are just slightly autistic. They tend to be not really good at social skills, but the high-functioning autism people can do really well with the math and the science, but they won't be able to look you in the eye. It's hard for them to look you in the eye. This overstimulation gets them upset. So if you're overstimulated, that can mean noise, that could be a lot of communication, hugs could freak people out. So you have to be, the autism, it's a spectrum, so there's a lot of different symptoms, but it's an issue. So this doctor did some research on autism, and he published this work. And it was accepted. It was peer-reviewed. It was published, peer-reviewed. And I'll talk about what peer review is. You read the chapter. What is peer-reviewed? Excellent. That's right. Good. So you have your research. You got your data. You did all the steps of the scientific method. You made your charts. You got it all in the little autism, the cause of autism, and you send it off. to other scientists. They read it. They think on it. They look at your science. They look at your numbers, and they said, "Okay, I agree. It's well done. The science is well done. They might have arguments against your conclusions, but they say the science is supported. So then you finally, and this is the other scientists, is usually anywhere from 3 to 6 people they get sent to. It gets sent to 3 to 6 scientists that are in your field. So if you're a neurobiologist, they send it to 3 to 6 other neurobiologists. And they look at it and they say, wow, okay, I read it. I read this thing. The data matches your conclusions. Your data analysis is spot on. You're fine. Maybe you can correct this or correct that. I understand your rationale. So what are they checking for? They're checking for evidence, claim, evidence, and then reasoning. They're checking to see if you have a good claim, your evidence is supported by the evidence, and your reasoning is logical. If those three things are check, 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 then it gets published in a magazine and gets sent out in a monthly or semi-month or bi-monthly or quarterly journal, and everybody reads it, and then it gets on the news. Does that make sense? So this is why scientific peer review is so important, because the stuff that we looked at earlier wasn't really peer reviewed. Nobody really asked any specialist opinion. They just published it. They just said it, and then they went with it. And then the Tuskegee experiments, nobody looked at the ethics or the humanity of it. Well, in this case, they did everything right, all that part right, supposedly, and they published it, and then it got on the news. So as a journal, and then some news group started reading it and said, "Oh wow, well, now we know what it caused." So they said, it went on the news. Do you know what the conclusion was to the cause of autism? Can you guess? What did they say caused autism? Make a guess. Their conclusion after the study that everybody said was okay, that everybody was good with, that was published, that went on the news, and he went on the news, and he was talking on news talk shows and everything. What did he say? What was the statement? What was the conclusion? Just make a guess. Runs in the family. Okay. Anybody else guess about what causes autism? Well, they said vaccinations cause autism. That was a godsend for parents that have autism. My brother is, like I said, the father of an autistic child. He would, obviously people that have children that have issues that might be genetic, they feel guilty, right? They should not. It's not their fault. It's not anybody's fault. But they feel guilty. So now they have someone to blame, right? Now I have a child, my neighbor, my sister, my brothers, they have kids that are running around and they're having fun. My child, I touch them, I look at them, and they start screaming. Like, I'm stressed out every day with my kid. I'm looking at my kid and I'm asking myself, why me? Now I have what? Who do I blame? Vaccinations. But who vaccinated my kid? Doctors and the government. The government forced me. The government's telling me it's good for me. Now all the bad things my auntie told me, now all the bad things my grandpa told me, now all the history that was behind me now comes flooding in, right? Oh my God, the government conspired against me to test, blah, blah, blah. The pharmaceutical companies conspired against me. The doctors conspired. Now I'm feeling all this pressure. Now what? Now it's not my fault. It's their fault. And they started a big campaign, and they called themselves, or somebody called them, I don't think they called themselves this, but they called themselves, or somebody called them anti-vaxxers. They were against vaccinations. They petitioned the government for exceptions. They helped each other get exception cards for religious and medical. It was a big deal, and people really, there was a big movement. Well, it turns out, guess what? Can anybody guess what happened?
They got sick?
No. What happened in all this? What was wrong? So the science was supposedly okay, right? Let's go down the little checklist. The science was supposedly okay because it was peer-reviewed. They had claim, evidence, and reasoning was correct, according to the peer review. It was published in a peer-reviewed journal. 3 to 6 other scientists, specialists in this field, agreed with the science of it. The news said it. The families were very happy. It started a movement against vaccinations. So, but what? It probably, the movement was probably already there, but it just really inspired the movement to move forward. So what went wrong? What's the only thing that could have possibly went wrong besides the fact that the research was wrong? But what was the issue? Just make a guess. There's no way for you to know. Bias is a really good guess. Absolutely. That's actually kind of true. It's actually worse than bias. It was something called, but you're right. That would have been the thing. Bias would. I love that you mentioned bias. Let's look at that. It could have been bias, and yes, hopefully the peer review would have caught that, right? That's what you hope, is that the peer review would have caught bias. Usually, if somebody's being biased in their studies, in their experiments, usually what happens is that the peer review catches the bias. And hopefully even before it gets to peer review. But no, what happened was, unfortunately, the worst thing that can happen, besides somebody being unethical, I guess the worst thing is that someone's being unethical, really, and hurting some human, emotionally or physically. That would be the worst thing. But the second worst thing is, in many ways, longer lasting. This doctor lied. He committed fraud. He made up his data. It is the biggest, besides hurting people and being unethical, it's the biggest science no ever. You do not make up data. Whatever the data is what it is. And then you have to figure out, the whole point of science is that we don't make things up. Like, that's the whole point. Otherwise, we're not doing science. So this is the last kind of bad science I want to look at. And this fraud, and it was later proven he was a fraud. He had to retract the paper. Everybody talked about he's a fraud, but it was too late. The anti-vaxxers were committed. They're done. They don't want to hear it. It's vaccines cause autism. That's it. And since then, people had this thing with vaccines. So does that make sense? Does it make sense that when COVID hit, people didn't want to get vaccinated? They didn't trust this vaccine. First of all, it was new, right? There's politics involved. People started getting politics involved. A lot of conspiracy people. You want to call them conspiracy nuts, but do conspiracies exist? Do conspiracies exist? Yeah, we just proved it. So you can't really call them nuts, right? I mean, we lived it. It's nuts not to think that it could be a conspiracy. But with like any good conspiracy, you have to ask this question first: who benefits? If somebody's telling you get vaccinated, why would they want you vaccinated? Why would they want Do you think the government today wants to sterilize us? Why would they want to sterilize us? What's the benefit? Okay, but not caring about you wouldn't mean they want to sterilize you. In fact, you see what the government's trying to do. You see what the conservative parties and everybody's trying to do. They want you to have babies. Right? They made abortion not legal. They want to get rid of contraception. They want to, they want to go. If just control yourselves or not, none of my business, but I don't want to have anything, blah, blah, blah. So it's really not trying to control your birthing rights. So it really didn't benefit anybody to get to sterilize you. It didn't benefit anyone to make you sick. So there was nobody would benefit here. You might say the pharmaceutical companies would make money, but they already made their money. Bless you. They already made the vaccines, and the government already bought them. So it's not the government. It's not the. Could there have been a lie going on? Sure, it's possible. But there was well-researched, many different studies, not one guy. This was one guy, one study, one guy. Everybody went with it. Did you see that? Vaccines are multiple studies, multiple doctors all around the world, all verifying, all repeating the experiments, and finding the same results. See, by the way, that first autistic, you know how he got caught? He got caught. And this is what always astounds me. There's been several scientists that have been caught, PhDs, doctors with labs and money, position and power. They've chosen to lie. But what bothers me is, if they're real scientists, they got to know what's the one thing that's going to happen in any real science. What needs to happen once you get a result. And you come up with your conclusion, you publish, what has to happen? You have to be able to do what? Quiz question. What do you have to be able to do? Redo it. You have to repeat it. You have to retest it. Right? Like we tested it. He says he tested it. He said he got these results. So the first thing that happened once he did that is you had 50 scientists from all over the world that were studying the same thing, doing the same experiment, following his procedures. And what did they find? Not what he said. And that's how he got caught. That's how they always get caught. Because in science, we have to repeat. If the experiment's not repeatable, either you made a mistake and nobody caught it, or you're lying. All right, so who benefits? Not many. So vaccines, anti-vaxxers do have there is a point to be concerns. Vaccinations, just as a point of fact, just some facts for you to think about. Vaccines can cause side effects. All right? You can have an allergic reaction. It is possible to have an allergic reaction and even die from a vaccine or have all kinds of problems from vaccines. There's a list of them. But what we do with any science, like in any science, we collect data. We know that these are possible outcomes. We know oh my gosh. We know that these are possible outcomes because of data. Millions of people got the disease. People got vaccinated. There was improvement in the outcome. Okay, there was improvement. Is that clear? There was improvement. Did it just disappear again? I don't know what this freaking app. So there was vaccines. Millions of people got vaccinated. There was improvement in the outcome. Before you leave, there was improvement in the outcome. There were very, very few side effects and allergic reactions. People did get hurt, but it's very rare as compared to the number of people that died from the disease. So that's why doctors say get vaccinated. All right, that's it for bad science. There was an improvement in the outcome because of vaccinations. Because of vaccinations, less people died. So I think that was a good thing overall. Now, did people get sterilized? Did people become? Did people have issues with did some people react badly to the vaccines? For sure that happened. Absolutely. I don't doubt it. All right, so there was an improvement, and there were very few. Again, obviously, if millions of people got it, and if it did sterilize people, shouldn't there be millions of people that are sterilized? That's not happening. Were there people that got sick or became whatever, any number of side effects? Yes, but they're very few. Very few of these negative response. Let's not use the word negative. Very few adverse reactions. Compared to the positive. With every decision, you have to compare. You have to balance bad outcomes with good outcomes. You have to find that balance. Here's the example they tried to use during vaccines. When I was a kid, nobody wore a seatbelt. Nobody. Baby? Not babies. I was a baby. My father was driving through the mountains of Puerto Rico, and I was in the front seat in a little baby thing because he was taking care of me, and he was driving, and I was in the front seat, no seatbelt. He was delivering eggs because it was back in the day when people delivered eggs and milk. When seatbelts were not a thing, and the government said, look, we all need to start wearing seatbelts. They work. And people said, well, wait a minute. And my best friend in high school said, I don't wear a seatbelt because what if the car turns over and splashes in the water and I'm drowning and it gets stuck? That could happen. And people die. It's true. Seatbelts can't kill you. You get in a car wreck, the gasoline is getting near the fire, and your seatbelt's stuck. What are you? Dead. Dead, burning alive. Horrible, horrible. Oh, drowning, burning alive, just trapped. Ew, caca. Right? So people freak out over that. But why do we wear seatbelts? Why do I wear a seatbelt? Why does everybody else wear a seatbelt now? Most people wear a seatbelt. Because 99% of the time, most of the time, I don't know about percentage, I'm just making that number up. But most of the time, what happens? Seatbelts protect you, save lives. It's the same with vaccines. Can something bad happen? Yes. But most of the time, vaccines help. Not just you, but everyone around you. We're part of a society. And it helps. It can hurt, but mostly it helps. So it's a risk. Here's another risk. My wife and I, we love seafood. We're from seafood eating people. I'm from the Caribbean. She's from Brazil. So we're eating shrimp once we were married, I think the first year we were married, we're eating shrimp at Christmas dinner at my mother's house. Then we go to her parents' house and we're eating shrimp there. And she starts to react. Hives pop up all over her chest. Her throat starts to swell up. I'm freaking out. She's freaking out. Like, could have killed her. She became allergic to shrimp. Eating a peanut butter sandwich, you could be eating your peanut butter and jelly sandwich and start to react and die. Does that mean you stop eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because you might get a reaction someday and die?
No.
Yes, you say? Okay. You could get stung by a bee. If you don't know that you're allergic, you could get stung by a bee and find out you're allergic when you die. Does that mean you don't go outside?
No.
It's because you don't know the
You're right, you don't know the possibilities, but there's a risk. There's a risk to going outside. There's a risk to crossing a street. Do you not cross the street because there's a risk? No. The answer is no. Driving is a risk. One of the biggest killers in the country is driving as car accidents. Does that mean we stop driving? Start everybody get a horse? No. I don't know. So my point is that there's risks to everything. What you have to do is sit down and balance the risk to the benefit. If I don't get my kid vaccinated and they get mumps, they die. They get rubella, or maybe not die. They get really sick, maybe die. They get rubella, they get really sick, maybe die. They get measles, they get really sick, maybe die. So do I get them the vaccine that has this much of a chance, a very tiny chance of having an adverse reaction? Or do I give them this, do I take a chance with the disease and have this much of a chance? I balance it, right? Good with bad, and I make a choice. That's life. Life is about making choices. That's why being an adult is so hard, because there's no right answer. There's only one better answer, one worse answer, and we don't know which one's which always. So when you see someone who's anti-vaxxer, you can't say you're an idiot. That's just silly. You can't do that. It doesn't work, first of all. Secondly, it's wrong. They have really good reasons why they don't believe, they think the vaccinations are a danger. You saw the history. You see the negatives. I hope this makes sense now. And what is good science and what's bad science?